Today is April 15th, 2003. Tom and Jay, you started off together back in Lowell.
We're both Lowell natives.
You're both from Lowell. Could you give me a little information about your early days?
Yeah, I was born in Lowell, and during the war, my family was living in Middleton and in Danvers. My father was working at the Lynn GE plant during the war effort, making a lot of money too. And after the war, when the plant started to slow down, he had a few odd jobs. In fact, he worked at the Hawthorne Hotel for one short period. And then he was offered a job in Lowell at a department store in downtown Lowell on Merrimack Street called Pollard's. And they wanted him to set up a toy department and a sporting goods department. And this was around 1948, when things were unheard of at the time. The stores would have toy departments, Lionel trains and all that. So when we moved back to Lowell, and I was a product of the Lowell public school system, and went to Lowell High School at the same time that Tom Sexton was there. And we were both graduates of the class of 1958, along with distinguished classmate Paul Songus.
That's interesting, Jay, because my father worked in the GE, drove from Lowell to Lynn for about 15 years. And then my mother wanted him to be closer to Lowell, so he went to work for Raytheon. Oh. So I have no idea. Yeah, we are products of the same school system, but Jay forgets how ethnically separated Lowell was. I mean, I lived in the Irish part. I went to the Immaculate Conception Grammar School. You went to...
Well, we moved around a little bit.
You went to a public school.
I went to the Dover Street School, the Morley School, the Bartlett School, junior high school, and then to the high school, because we moved to public.
You were parochial school.
Oh, you'd identify someone in Lowell by the school they went to. And if you said St. Patrick's, you knew they lived in the acre. You knew exactly where they lived. You knew, their economic status. So I straddled it. I lived in Lowell.
But did you know each other before?
I knew Jay because he was an excellent baseball player. And the park where we spent all our time, he was on the first Little League team. I had no arm. I couldn't get from the pitcher's mound to the plate, so obviously I was eliminated in the first go-round. So I knew him that way, and then I knew him from high school. And he also played basketball for St. Stanislaus.
Holy Trinity.
Holy Trinity, which was the Polish area. And I lived right around the corner from there. And we knew each other off and on in high school. But you hung around with kids from your own neighborhood. And when I really met Jay, it's rather interesting, because when I got out of high school, I went into the Army.
Now, what year was that?
That was 59. And when I got out of the service, I came back to Lowell, and I had a series of really wonderful jobs. I was a landscape gardener. I was a day laborer, unloading everything from freight cars. Let's see, did I have a decent job? I don't think I did. And then I just decided to go to school. So I went to Newman Prep for one semester.
What street was that on in Boston?
Marlboro? Newbury. Yeah. I only took 2 courses. I took an English course and a math course. I guess those were the things that would prepare you to take the test to go to college. I remember freezing over the finals in the math, and I sat there with my pen above the answer book for 3 hours and never got one answer down. But I did very well in the English, and so I applied to Northern Essex, and they took me. I mean, the grades I got there, except for math, were fine. And from there, I went to Salem, and one of the most amazing things, I don't think I was there for an hour, And, no, I was 22. Actually, I think I was probably closer to 23. And they had all the new transfers in this room. And this handsome fellow was up there giving us introduction to Salem State. And I kept looking at him and thinking, I know him from somewhere. Well, it was Jay.
But wait a second. You didn't come to Salem State in 63.
No, 66.
66, that's when I began.
Yeah. Oh, that was your first
That was my
year.
first semester.
And they had you already talking to the incoming freshmen? Because you were.
Here's what my recollection of it is. That I was teaching down in the basement level of the Sullivan building where the Callan Theater is.
Okay.
And you came by pushing a broom because you were working part-time, work
Yeah, that's
study.
true. I was a janitor. Probably the best they've ever had here. I'm very proud of that.
Well, you were a better janitor than you were at math, a student of math.
Yeah.
But anyway, I recollect as clear as can be, you're coming by my classroom and doing a double take, and I was probably teaching composition. And it was September of 1966. And you poked your head in and said, do you remember me?
That's a better story.
I'm Tom Sexton.
Right.
This is my recollection.
No, that is a better story.
And
But
I
you
said-
did talk to us. I remember that. Maybe it was later.
Now, can I go back just a little
Sure.
bit? You were in the service,
Right, I was in the Army.
so you were came back to go to school in the GI Bill.
Yeah, but at first I just came back to get a job,
Ah.
and then, yeah. And I'm not sure, Bruce, if I think I had already started school when they revived the GI Bill, but only for a semester, maybe, and that's what kept me going.
Had you had any specialized training in the Army? Or?
Yeah, I was a company clerk.
Typist.
I was a typist. I could say I was an Army SEAL or but I wasn't.
Where were you serving?
Alaska.
Oh, you were in Alaska?
I
then?
spent 2 years in Alaska, and then I spent almost a year in Omaha.
Uh-huh. Were you there with when the earthquake hit?
No, I was here, thank God. We've been through several
Up to 64.
Yeah, no, I'd already left. And the town I knew was pretty much gone by the time I got back there.
That was the Anchorage earthquake of
Yeah.
1964.
Yeah, it's still the largest earthquake in North America.
Going back just a bit, if I could, the community college was just created.
Right.
Do you know, was it 63, and then you were a student in 64?
Yeah, I think it opened in 63.
So you're a
It was
product
the old jail building, I think, in Bradford.
outside of Haverhill.
Yeah, just on the other side.
Yep.
It was pretty close to downtown.
So if you hadn't gone to a community college, if they hadn't been created, you couldn't afford tuition probably.
No, absolutely not. And if they hadn't been created, I wouldn't have gotten a BA and an MFA and become a poet.
So your matriculation goes from the community college, and then you slide right into Salem State College, and by then Salem is offering a BA in English.
Right, and the first BA, I believe.
Correct. Because prior to that, Salem was a teacher's college offering a BS, and when the reform was the Willis-Harrington Reform Act. Do you know the year of that, Bruce? 63, 64?
It was around that time.
So then the state colleges, you came in just as the state colleges were starting to march toward being truly, fully integrated, well, true, full liberal arts
Yeah, it
colleges.
was the first liberal arts graduating class that I was in. It sounds, well, it is true, but I wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't gone to Northern Essex, had some very good teachers there, and then came here. And, when you're really a non-traditional student,
Right.
even when you're in your early 20s, I think you need more attention than you would at a large school. This was a wonderful place. I enjoyed every minute of it. I even enjoyed sneaking into President Meyer's office with my broom when he was away to see what was going on that was quite important. Career advice: being a janitor in the headquarters, in the best building, is very,
Tell
very
me,
valuable.
did you have a relationship with?
Oh, absolutely.
Meyer?
Yeah, because he saw me every day, and I remember his, what was it, his administrative assistant. I can't remember. I can see.
O'Keefe.
Yeah.
Mary
Wonderful.
Mary O'Keefe.
Yeah. And then, you know, the funny story is that I was over in the where Dean Sullivan was. And I was just growing the beard. When I got here, I had a mustache, a good mustache. The Army makes you look older. And I'm coming down the hall with my broom, and he goes like this. And I go in, he said to me in the nicest, gentlest voice possible, "I think you'd look better without that beard." And I said, well, I have no idea what I said. But he said it in a kind enough way that I really didn't feel threatened.
Mm-hmm.
I kept my beard. But I was the only student in the college without a beard. And I think one of 5 with mustaches. And then they started sprouting everywhere, not because of me, but because
The time.
yeah, it was the time.
I think probably because you were an Army veteran, you were allowed to stay. There were other students who were thrown on campus for long hair in those days.
Well, and his son was a veteran who actually went to school here, or his nephew.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Were you stationed in Alaska when your mother died? What year was that, 1960?
No, it was 59.
59?
I'd only been there a couple months.
So that poem, Memoir, is about that, and you're far away and the boy comes home.
Yeah, I've actually thought of changing the line where I'm far away and far away from home to when I was learning how to be a soldier, which may be a better line.
Well, I like the fact that you were in Alaska and you didn't know.
No,
How
no,
she-
I didn't know. I didn't know what happened to my mother until about 10 years ago. No one
Specifically?
ever told me.
Can you tell me how you discovered that and how you were kept in
Well,
the dark?
that's when my sister decided. In the poem, it says my sister's memoir called a novel. Well, she wrote a novel, and it was obviously not a novel. It was about her own house, and she talked about going down in the basement and finding her mother hanging from a rafter. Now, I'd known my mother died in the basement, but I thought she had a heart attack. That's what I was told. And then the irony of it is that Deirdre Nason, the woman who contacted me when she was a student nurse in 59, my mother had tried to kill herself then. So.
By what means?
I didn't ask.
I see.
But she had she had arthritis. Her knee used to swell. She obviously had depression. So that's all I really know.
Her maiden name was Quinn?
Yeah, Quinn.
So you're up in Alaska and you don't find till you're in your early 50s.
You're right. Yeah,
Because your sister sends you a manuscript.
and not telling me that, just writing her own.
She's assuming you know. She assumes you know.
I guess she did. I'm not sure. Well, we did talk about it. She did say she thought it.
The poem also reveals, or the poem before it, that she's really your half-sister, which you found out at the same
I
time.
found that out when she wrote the novel.
So at the same time you find out about your mother, you find out that she was sired by somebody else other than your father.
Mm-hmm. That's not that much of a shock because I'm still not sure if that's certain, even though my sister is, because one of my aunts decided to had his teeth taken care of. And they were taking the radiation and putting black wax marks on his face and he'd come in looking something like a checkerboard. And as we moved from the top to the bottom, he died. He died about a week after I left. But that's I don't know how to write that poem.
It's like the Eskimo with a tattoo.
Yeah.
That poem.
I loved being a janitor too. This was just a great place to be. And then we went west.
And I noticed that there was quite a few concerts and things back in those 2 years. Judy Collins was here on campus.
Yeah.
Tom Rush.
Yeah, I think maybe I saw Tom Rush. I remember John Ciatti, the poet.
Yes, he was
here.
Yep.
And then the fellow that was always in trouble for handing out condominiums.
Beard.
Bill Beard.
Bill Beard.
I remember, God, the world has changed, hasn't it?
It certainly has.
I remember, yeah, there was.
Who was the guitarist, the black guitarist in the South Mississippi that was here? Famous?
John Lee Hurt?
No. Up in the morning and after school.
Oh, Chuck Berry.
Chuck Berry.
Chuck Berry.
I remember that he was performing over in the old gym. What that was in those days was called the new gym, where the basketball team played. And he was shaking and doing his act on stage. And
Yeah, another advantage to being a janitor.
got in free.
I'm giving you some career advice. You could appear anywhere.
In any event, the dean was going to give him his $500 check or whatever it was, and she said, "If you don't stop shaking, I'm not going to pay you." So you can see that, I think this was around 66 or 67, so there was a little left over on campus.
Well, the current president was an education teacher. I remember she was over in that other building.
Correct. Horseman.
That was kind of separated from the rest of the college.
Yep.
Remember her distinctly for some reason.
And she had just been appointed to that job.
She might have been dean of education then. Or did her mother have something to do with
No. I think she was hired in '68, and I think she may have been teaching at the Horace Mann, may have been a principal there. And then she became a member of the education department at Salem State, I think in '68. And then she rose to become chair of the department. And then she became the coordinator for continuing ed, the dean of the graduate school.
Wow.
And then she became, we're talking about Nancy Harrington, president.
Yeah.
And then she went to, she worked to get her PhD from DED or EDE in education from BU. And she was the academic vice president before she became president of the college. And so she's homegrown. She was a graduate of Salem State College. And her brother, who died rather young, was the president of Massachusetts Maritime Academy down in the Cape. And I think he died about 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
And there are a couple interesting economics teachers. Wizakowski.
He's still here. Kawakowski.
He must be older than I am, by quite a bit.
So a couple of guys in the economics had Marx's views.
Yeah, they did, and they had long flowing hair, and they were always getting.
And they were opposed to the war in Vietnam.
Well, the list of speakers back then. I mean, you mentioned Baird, but you also had going from Goldwater to Kennedy.
That's right. Yeah.
You had Kevin White. You had Kozol, F. Lee Bailey.
That's where I saw Jonathan Kozol.
It was quite an eclectic.
Is it the same now?
I don't believe so. We have a speaker series now that heads for 3 or 4 major speakers, but not. It was, well, what's that, about 14 speakers between October '66 and May of '68.
And I've read that the new governor will gut the schools and call it improvement.
That's his idea.
Sending all the Utah to work on the slopes,
Bruce,
groom ski trails.
I think during the day, we had some of those activities during the day.
Yeah, they
Speakers would come during the day.
It was like yesterday.
Tom and I were talking about that Sunday at my house over dinner. We have now what is known as community time. And we had that when you were at school here,
Definitely.
because this is such a commuter school that if you have programs in the evening, unless you have national figures like a former president,
Right.
the students all go home or go to work. And there was a period of time for about 10 years when there was not that community time. And it was nothing, and the students, the college lost a lot of its personality that way. And I remember when I was president of the teachers union, I said to the vice president, Bill Mahaney, I said, we should restore that and give this college a sense of self, better self-image and a sense of community. And they did, and you were reading yesterday during that community hour. So on Mondays, from 11 until 12:30, is supposed to be club activity or guest speakers. But they don't have the speakers that you mentioned, Bruce, when you went through that list of nationally prominent speakers.
But I mean, and it's a major list. I mean, Truman Nelson, John Chiardi, Henry Steele Commager,
Right.
Hayakawa.
Hayakawa.
Remember that visit by
And then there was
Hayakawa?
somebody put on a series, and you had a speaker from a different religious group. You had Judaism, Islam, Hinduism.
I don't remember that.
They had a Swami. But it seemed to me that you had a lot of
Yeah, and
enjoyable outside.
someone I didn't mention, I really should have, was Neil Olson, the librarian,
Mhm.
because he used to take me through the stacks and point to books of poetry he thought I should read.
Uh-huh.
Now, imagine that. That just doesn't happen. And he did. And I don't know how
Who were the poets?
the relationship, he'd take anyone. I mean, I joked the other day that, he asked me if I'd read Anne Sexton, and I thought he meant Anglo-Saxon, but he really did say, have you read Anne Sexton? And I'm sure Lowell, all the New England poets, because he's a poet himself.
Yeah,
I
he was.
hope he introduced me to Philip Locke, because whoever did was a wonderful person.
I think Neil was active in the Cambridge, Boston poetry circles. He wrote an article in the Sextant, or a review of a book, and talked about Sylvia Plath and Robert Lowell and Anne Sexton, who went to school in Lowell, by the way, Anne Sexton.
Well, that's one of the reasons I was walking around Rogers Hall,
Yeah.
which is now part of the YWCA. I
Right.
think. But, anyway, so.
Well, did you get involved in any of the local issues on campus
Not really.
yourself? I mean,
I was in the first Vietnam War protest that was out in front of the library, where people were going to burn their draft cards, which was extremely controversial.
Right.
But Tom, that was the Student Union building, I think. This is the library's over there now. That was before the new library was
This was the
built.
library that
Near the bell tower?
was on, yeah.
So when you say library today, people think of the library over here. Yeah.
That didn't even exist. You mentioned the bell tower. That's, of course, now long gone also.
Oh, it is.
Tore it down.
Tore it down.
It's a hazard.
Well, it was a commuter school. But I taught at a commuter school for 24 years. No one stays there after classes.
Mhm.
But I think the world has changed so much that everybody's working 2 or 3 jobs. But people stayed here. I mean, people would be here at 8 o'clock at night still talking about this and that.
Do you recall the dress code as being an issue?
No. I always wore a sport coat and a tie. I haven't had a sport coat and a tie on for 25 years.
That's the way I am now too myself.
But I did. I
But
didn't.
back then,
That didn't bother me. No. Chino pants.
there was, I noticed in the handbook, dungarees. It doesn't say
That's
jeans.
right.
The dungarees were not allowed.
That's right. People were sent home for having dungarees on. Yeah. God.
The student protest is, I mean, it's a natural thing on a college campus, and lots of local issues of, you know, parking and cafeteria and the dress code. That's one thing. And yet at the same time, what's really being protested are things like the sort of Vietnam War,
I do remember that.
racial conflicts. It was during that period that
Oh,
Fred Meyer said that he wanted to bring in 50 blacks, 50 Negro students it was.
that must have been after I'd already left, I think.
That was in 66.
Oh, it was. I
67.
don't remember that at all.
I don't either.
I do remember one thing, though, that could only happen in Salem State. I guarantee it's never happened anywhere in the world. And I think he was the only African-American faculty member, Mr. Francis, who had a Harvard degree. Because some people here who had Harvard. You don't think he had a Harvard?
No, he's working toward it.
Oh, well, anyway.
He was Cape Verdean, I believe.
He told Franco-American students that they could not get A's no matter what they got in their exams because they spoke with an improper accent. And that actually made the national press. Do you remember that? That was, I mean, that even reached Alaska. Because 40% of the students were Franco-American. They grew up speaking both French and English, and no, it didn't matter to him.
They needed a Parisian accent.
Yeah, well, whatever it was, I never mastered it. I made the French teacher at Northern Essex cry in front of the class. And he had tears. Mr. Crook, if you're still alive, I'm sorry, but I couldn't do it. We shouldn't go on. Now I understand you just slur everything, and you're probably fairly close to the right.
Bruce, when you were talking about the parochial nature of this college when he was a student and I first started teaching, if you were absent from a class 3 times in a semester, we had to turn in attendance cards every day, IBM attendance cards. If you showed up more than 3 times absent from a class without talking to the teacher, the administrative wing would flunk the student from the class for more than 3 absences. It was automatic, done by the computer. And that was one of the issues when the students, well, that's right. When you talk about parking and student protests and dress codes, that was on the plate as well, attendance.
I don't remember feeling oppressed in any way. You know,
That's because you were used to it.
yeah, I suppose that's true.
And as someone once said that President Frank Keegan, after Maya left, pushed a lot of Salem State College, kicking and screaming in resistance into the 20th century.
The penny sheet itself, that became.
Yeah, somebody gave us an office and a mimeograph machine, and there must have been 500 people here who wanted to be poets, and they'd just show up all week long with their poems, and my wife, whose name was Sharon Hultquist, she did a lot of typing, but there were a lot of people who did it. And, that's kind of amazing when you think of it, because faculty space wasn't all that available, and they gave us a whole cubicle and supplied everything. And then we used to put it in the front of the lunchroom on Friday and ask for a penny donation. Most people paid a quarter, and it was pretty amazing. And that's one of the things that got me into graduate school. Was that experience, because after all, there are English majors everywhere, but most of them haven't. No matter whether it was just mimeographed, I was still producing magazines. And that's what got me into the creative writing program. I'll bet 100, 150 people bought it every week.
Really?
Yeah,
people waited for it to come out
Yeah.
because it included poetry by students, faculty members,
Right, faculty too, I
some
thought.
staff,
Yeah.
and then we'd have the poetry discussions the following week over in the Student Union building.
And Jay sent me some, and I'm surprised that they weren't bad. They weren't bad at all. Well, I mean, you get this idea in your head. I wrote a poem about, what was it? Something, an abstraction, like truth or something, coming up the stairs in its jack boots. Now, I thought that was pretty wonderful, man. And just think of how awful that really was. You grow, you mature. But every once in a while, there were people in there who would write something that was amazing.
I remember that office. It was right around the corner from my office,
Yeah.
on the second floor of the Sullivan building.
Yeah.
And the log had been there in that cubicle in '66, and then the Student Union building opened. They moved across to the Student Union building, and you got that space. Because my office was right across. It's right now. It's where Margaret Vaughan's office is, opposite classroom 205 or 209 or something like that.
And it went on for what, 2 or 3 years after?
Yes.
I think.
And another thing that opened up, and it was shortly before you came here, or maybe well, you just arrived, was the Scarborough Fair. And there was a lot of poetry reading done at the Scarborough Fair.
It was a fair, you're right.
It was in the basement of the Student Union
Right.
building.
Guitar picking and folk singing and some poetry reading.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And there was also a house over here on Lafayette Street. You told me the name of that group. They used to have like a little coffee shop.
Oh, yeah.
And Judge O'Neill. The thing about the penny sheet that was interesting, people really waited for it to come out. They wanted to see it.
No, I met Judge O'Neill God because I haven't thought of him for so long.
But the other thing that was interesting was that we would, if the penny sheet would come out on a Friday, it came out weekly.
Yeah.
And you were the founder of that, and Judge Grossbeck was like the faculty advisor.
Faculty advisor.
It was your idea. You had done something similar to that.
We became faculty advisor
later.
after.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You had done something like
I
that.
had done a magazine at Northern Essex.
In Northern Essex, so.
Don't ask me how I got these ideas, because I have no idea in the world. I mean, I can't say, well, one day I decided to enlighten the literary awareness of Haverhill, Massachusetts. Probably someone mentioned it to me. And I've always been good at getting other people to do all the work.
But what I wanted to say was that around Wednesday or Thursday, we would go to a room over the Student Union building, and we'd have a discussion of the poetry.
That's right.
We'd have a roundtable discussion.
No, that's right.
And I remember upwards somewhere 15 to 20 people would be there. Some of them, the poets themselves, other people who helped distribute the sheet and wanted to talk about poetry. And this is what I got out of the poem, and you were there obviously, and it was quite a...
That's right, by God, yeah.
And I'd be there with Hank and Pat Gazemba and
It was written right on some of the penny sheets. Discussion Tuesday, April 30th.
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Discussion Tuesday, 4/18/1967.
Yeah, what can I say? I mean,
Henry
those
Burns had a poem in that one. McHale, Xenios, Ellen Spanks.
And Xenios was an athlete too, wasn't he?
Yeah, so was Glenn Melton.
Yeah.
Melton.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Xenios was a very good tennis player.
Yeah.
There was another thing, we used to have a tennis tournament here.
Mhm.
You remember that, Tom? Was that, Tom, do you remember that when we had
Not
the...
really, no, I remember beating you at basketball for tennis. You know, I actually beat you once
Playing what?
playing tennis, or at least I won a game,
Oh.
which
Everybody's
was a
entitled.
great triumph.
Everybody's entitled to a mistake now and then.
Oh, there was a fellow who worked in the biology department, Ken Sharp, who was a good tennis player.
He was a lab assistant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember playing tennis with him, and Gazemba played. You played with Gazemba and Burns all the time.
Do you
Yeah,
remember,
there was always a tennis match going
We had a tournament here. I don't know if you left.
No, and I wasn't very good.
Well, you know, that's one of the things I've noticed. Back in those days, there was a great deal of involvement between the faculty and
Yeah, that was what I was trying to say, you know, you didn't play tennis with other students,
Right.
you were most likely playing tennis with a student and then a faculty member and back and forth. And
But
no one
many
thought
things, I mean,
anything of it, did they?
Well, you had Dean Amsler, who was playing tennis. Fred Meyer was the president. He liked to play tennis.
But it didn't seem like anything special.
Oh, no, there was a sense of community. But you have to understand, when I came here, my first year here, they hired 55 people. I think maybe 10 administrators and 45 faculty. And some of us were very young. I was 26. And you're a student here, and you're my age. You're a month older than I am. So why wouldn't I have a lot in common? Why wouldn't I have a lot in common with you? Not to mention the fact that we had known each other by then since 1953 or 52 or whatever it was. But we were young, and a lot of people were returning veterans. There were more than a few returning veterans who were our age.
Yeah,
Or,
I'd say three.
but we were also, the faculty was very young.
But it wasn't just the tennis. There was stage shows.
Oh,
Things
yes.
like, I mean, all sorts of activities.
Community of interest. We had a lot of energy. We were young. I don't know how I ever managed to correct papers.
I think he just made a good point, though. That was a young faculty. There was an old faculty
Yes.
and a very young
An
faculty.
influx.
Yeah.
At college, they had to hire faculty, and at that time, there was a faculty shortage in this country. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got hired.
Bruce, I remember another faculty member, Mr. Cooney. Cooney and I never saw eye to eye over anything for some strange reason. But he was an elderly man. He had
Arthur Kuhn.
Kuhn had lost
Yes.
one of his arms,
He
and
was
he'd been a
hired.
commercial printer for about 30 years. And I took Shakespeare for him,
Right.
and I was talking to him one day, and I was saying I might go to graduate school, and he said to me, "Don't miss the chance I did. If you want to do it now while you're young." I'll never forget that, because he wasn't a chatty guy
No.
at all.
He was
Must have
in,
been in his 60s.
yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was hired the same year I was. He was one of an older mix, and then younger people, with the money left over, they hired younger people.
Yeah, well, I said he was in his 60s.
I think he was.
Because when you're in your 20s, someone in their 35 seems ancient. Yeah, but he was an elder.
Yeah, he was.
Man. Bought a house, looked right on the water
Correct.
and the willows. And,
He was a fine gentleman, too.
yeah, he's a very, very nice man. So as Matthew Cooney was, too.
But do you think that the closeness was brought up on at all by world events at the time? I mean, it was a pretty depressing
No, I
time
really
of
don't
the time
think
of
so.
life. I mean, Bobby Kennedy was killed on actually the day that you had your class day.
Wasn't that all right at the very end, though?
68,
Yeah.
Vietnam.
Martin Luther King
Protest.
was assassinated in April. Well, back in
Gosh,
'66,
that's right,
back in
yeah.
'66, new weekly U.S. casualty figures from Vietnam: 970, 142 killed.
Wow.
That was when you started.
Yeah.
So
I
was
do
it-
remember being in a protest, but I also was about a week away from re-enlisting, so I obviously had some, very mixed feelings as to what was right.
Is that domino theory again? Re-enlisting, stop the commies?
Did you think that poem worked with the domino
Yes.
theory? No, I mean, I got out of the military. There was, I think, depressing in the sense there wasn't any work. You couldn't get a decent job if you just had a high school graduate degree. And I remember getting a letter from my commanding officer in Omaha saying, two of your friends have re-enlisted, why don't you want to? And I thought, oh my God, the U.S. Army is in pretty bad shape if they want me to come back. But I seriously considered it. So I wasn't that riven at the time. And then when I got to Alaska, I mean, the war was almost over by the time it got there, in a sense of having any real influence.
Bruce, when you talk about the events taking place and the sense of community and involvement, we're looking here at the late 60s, and this is a decade of tremendous upheaval.
Absolutely.
And changes in national issues and local issues and youth-driven post-war baby boomers with buying power, wanting to get their ways, looking at social mores differently, looking at what educational curricula are relevant, what kind of attendance policy, what's going on in Vietnam, what's going on with blacks. And these were issues that were driven nationally as well as locally, because that was a tumultuous decade, the 60s, and Salem was just catching up to it in the late 60s. And given the use of the faculty in national issues and local issues, it had a tendency to congeal a center of interest. This college had a center of interest, a field of interest, which it no longer has, because this is before we had the central campus, before we opened the, well, we had the dormitories, there were only two dormitories.
They just built one of them.
But that was before the other two campuses were added. So everything had a tendency to be focused on this campus.
I remember, though, now that you mention it, there was a lot of ferment about McCarthy's run for president. And it really was, I mean, passionate here, very passionate.
College youth.
Yeah, well, just everyone was wrapped up in going into Boston to Fenway Park for that big rally. So, you know, I'm probably forgetting some of the
I'm sure you
intensity. Yeah.
Keep it clean for Gene.
Well, if I can't remember the difference between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, these things happen.
I'll never say a word.
So, as to like evaluating your educational experience here at Salem.
When I got to, I always remember this one, when I got to Fairbanks, I was terrified. There were people there from Fordham, there were people there from Michigan. You know, there were 10 of us as TAs, and one from Minnesota, and a couple from small Catholic girl college, women's colleges, one in Vermont. And I thought, I'm not going to know anything. I knew as much as they did. And the funny thing was, of course, because I have a working class New England accent, people out there don't know that. You know, so they thought I was a blue-blooded Yankee, right? I mean, they honestly did. It's just the assumption they made. And so they used to listen to me, because after all, but no, I was really well prepared. You know, I remember, I've said this several times, but at the time, I don't know if it's still a passion, but Pat Gazemba taught American Lit and the neoclassical, and I still remember things she taught in that neoclassical course. And Stein, who taught romantics, was a very, very good teacher. And I took a couple classes from Matthew Cooney. They were survey courses, but he was very good. So, you know, in terms of English, I was there. I was able to easily compete with people from elite schools. So the only thing I can say is they were doing it right here.
Well,
there was one fellow, what was his name? Billy Joe Williams or something.
American Lit.
Yeah, he was only here for a year.
No, he had just gotten here. He stayed.
In '68.
Yeah, but he stayed. He retired about 6 years ago.
I'll never forget. I was standing there, and and Dr. Antonakis too. I'm not sure if I had a class from him, but you know, students loved that man. He was a god. But anyway, I'm standing in front of his office, and Williams comes up to me and he says something, and I said, well, I don't know. You know, I'm getting ready to go to graduate school. And I got a TA, and he said, they'll beat you up and get rid of you in 3 months. I mean, it was just one of the most negative comments. The other thing, even to this day, I can figure is that must have happened to him somewhere along his life. Here, I thought this was the most wonderful thing in the world. You know, I had my letter from the dean of the University of Alaska saying congratulations. He looked at it, it's just like, they'll spit you out.
Well, I want to go on record saying I never had Tom as a student, and so I'm not responsible for his success in any way. But to go back to his point, at a school like Salem in those days, he was being exposed to full-time teachers who had some years of experience behind them teaching. It wasn't their first summer camp, and he wasn't at BU or Northeastern with a teaching assistant taking over and teaching a course, and you only see a full professor in graduate school. As an undergraduate, he was exposed to people of senior title and senior years in service. And so when a Salem student goes to another school, sometimes they've been exposed to more veteran faculty than a student from the West Coast who goes to University of California or UCLA or a larger school. I think that has something to do with our students' success in graduate school. And we do have a history of fairly good success. Well, I'm talking about the English department. Our students have done fairly well. Not all have become poet laureates of states, but...
Now, when were you last teaching?
I retired in 94.
94. Okay. So you best could answer this. Compared to today's students, what was Tom's education like?
Oh, the student body at Salem State in his day when he was here, when I was first teaching, was somewhat intimidating to me. First of all, the school was much smaller. I think when you graduated, the class size may have been around 3,500.
You know, the classes weren't all that. They weren't.
Now we're over 5,000, so we have a larger population. The school was smaller, and I think the school was more selective. And there were some, I remember distinctly, people like Tom, who were veterans who had been in the service, who were older, or as old or a year within a year of me. And they certainly knew the world better than I did. Having traveled, in some cases, I remember there was a couple of veterans who had served in Japan and been in Korea. I forget their names offhand.
I remember doing 35 and 40-page research papers in 4 classes. But it ended in December and started in January, so you had a month there to work on them. But the workload, it wasn't, come on in, how are you? We need the tuition. You know,
oh no, and Salem was competitive.
Yeah.
Because, you know, at that time, his class is the first BA class. So you have to figure there were students who couldn't afford to go to BU or Northeastern to go study English, to study for an English degree, a baccalaureate in English arts. And all of a sudden, it could be a student from Medford. Instead of paying the tuition to go to BU, Salem opens up that major. Oh, that's for me. I don't have to cross the bridge. I can drive right to Salem. The tuition is affordable, and it's a BA in English. That's what I want. So competition to get in here in his day was a lot stiffer than it was 20 years later. So the caliber of student in those days, we had some really, really good students. Serious students, very serious about learning literature.
It was the only state college that had a liberal arts degree then, wasn't it? I mean,
No.
Lowell was music.
Oh, no, they all got the liberal arts BA at the same time, but Lowell did specialize in music, and we specialized in business. But, and also we were living in an age where literature had more importance than it does now, because we live in an age of cell phones, and an age of email, and an age of movies and video packs, and the written word was, in the late 60s and early 70s, had much more standing than it does now. And when Tom said earlier about everybody seemed to want to be a poet, that's true, you know, because Bob Dylan was writing folk music, and people were thinking of him as a poet, and Joni Mitchell was writing folk lyrics, and she was thought of as a poet, and everybody wanted to be a poet, so poetry had a greater standing in folk art and in general student population than it does now.
In fact, I think if you look at some penny sheets, there were a few poems in the penny sheet that were set to music. I just have a visual recollection.
So when you left Salem went to Fairbanks.
Right.
You were a TA
For 2 years.
for 2 years, and then you made your way down.
Well, it's actually a little bit of luck. When I graduated, the department chair liked me, and he left Fairbanks for Anchorage to open up a new campus, even though Fairbanks was only 15,000 people and Anchorage was already 50. There was no school because it was a land-grant college out in the woods. It was really wonderful. And he hired me to go with him. And I kind of hate to tell people that because people talk about these awful job searches they had, and they had to do this and they had to do that. I got my MFA and I was offered a job teaching, and I was teaching graduate students in the first semester. Yeah, it was very, very fortunate. I might